recent decades, technology, including artificial intelligence, has really succeeded. But robots in human form, for some reason, still do not exist. They exist in research laboratories, appear at science fairs, and occasionally, rather to demonstrate the latest developments, perform simple jobs in the service sector.
Absolutely not. So there's no consciousness in these models right now. They are frozen models. They're frozen in time. They can't learn. They can't go out to the internet. All that exists is those connections it made in a 300-year equivalent of training. So there's no consciousness or awareness, but we should be ready for that to be available to us as well. There's a couple of philosophers that are very deep into this area, and I find it to be a fascinating area. But right now we're safe. We just have to be ready for that conversation. Microsoft are a very smart company. They've been around for a very long time in terms of technology. They were there in the early days. I was using Windows 3.1 back in the early 90s. They're smart guys. They want to keep up with the times. They made a very early investment in OpenAI with $1 billion a couple of years ago. And as you mentioned, there's talk now that they might be valuing that OpenAI company at closer to $30 billion, which is very interesting. So there's billions of dollars flowing around because they can see that artificial intelligence is ready. And imagine how powerful that would be built into Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, Microsoft PowerPoint. They've already put DALL-E 2, which is a text-to-image model, into Microsoft Designer. And there's talk of putting it into Microsoft Bing. So your search results won't just be pinging the internet, they'll also be via natural language. They'll be generating a real conversation with you in real time, again, based on those connections with that very advanced artificial intelligence. Google brought in the founders, Larry and Sergey, to talk about being more visible with artificial intelligence. And they brought out quite a long report that mentions green lane, which is like a priority lane for speed. Google certainly shouldn't be worried. I know that it's maybe easy to say that there's Microsoft and OpenAI as a big competitor here because they're visible, but Google has been doing this for far longer. They came up with the transformer technology. They gave us Lambda. They didn't release Lambda, but they gave us Lambda. They gave us the first large language model, BERT, back in 2018. They're on the bleeding edge for sure. They've got some of the smartest scientists in their lab right there. It's just about them wanting to make sure that everything is completely safe. You don't want to be releasing a model to the public that's not citing its sources or saying stuff that it shouldn't be. So it needs to be aligned with human values, and that's what OpenAI have done with their latest model releases. That's part of the fun of the openness of artificial intelligence. So I've worked in a number of fields where research and practice is very much closed. There's a very competitive environment. These AI models, the transformer as a whole and then large language models, are being documented and that released into the public domain via these white papers. So Google talks with OpenAI, talks with DeepMind, talks with Amazon had an Alexa model, there's a very long list of these companies, and they're all using this essentially open technology. It's not proprietary yet. They're all using the same maths and data behind it in slightly different ways. That means you can have the 10 major AI labs that are out there right now, and there's room for 1,000 more. There's nothing stopping them from going to create their own model and train their own model. It just costs a little bit to do that. Certainly a consideration. Isn't it fascinating that we said that AI art and creativity AI art would never overtake humans, and creativity would be the last bastion for us. And it's one of the first things that was essentially augmenting and maybe even replacing artists. Now you can go and generate a large oil painting canvas in a moment, or do a design and branding for a product in a moment. And by a moment, I mean 10 or 20 seconds. That's available to us. For blue-collar workers, robotics is doing quite well. You've got Boston Dynamics doing incredible things. And then probably more interestingly, places like Google applying these models to their own robotics. So it's actually using a large language model rather than being pre-programmed. I'd certainly be concerned for any job in the world if our governments have not got us prepared for this, because no one is safe from this. It will help augment and amplify absolutely everyone. So if you're an accountant, as we've heard, a doctor, a surgeon, a lawyer, a business person, All of these have already been augmented, and you've got the latest OpenAI models that can pass the regulations or the exams for these particular occupations. You could view that as a good thing, though. If you're one of those particular occupations or a consultant, you can almost 10x your productivity just by using these models. Not the frozen models, so not the large language models. So if you talk about one of the language models out of OpenAI again, GPT-3, its training data ends sometime around 2019. The latest version of that ends sometime around 2021. Because they have to freeze that data, let it train for many months, and then release it. So it's not real time, it's not up to date. You can't go and ask it for this month's news because that's not what it does. There are other artificial intelligence models that you can tie that into, and it will help with language processing about the company's financials, for instance, or it can help with forecasting. But it's not its specialty at the moment. Even though it's taught itself maths, it's not going to be able to predict which is the best share to buy right now. It's a possibility, absolutely. And that is the race at the moment, is to collect as much data as possible. As I mentioned, DeepMind are the top ranked AI lab at the moment, collecting 10.5 terabytes of clean text data. That's not the limit, but we can't go that much further. I think if we collected every book on Earth, it wouldn't be much bigger than that. That's 10,500 gig of text files. But once we get there, you're right, it's going to be close to knowing everything that there is to know. I know that sounds exaggerated and kind of sounds dramatic, but go and try out these models yourself and you'll see you can have a conversation with it about anything, including your favorite hobby or your favorite interest. You can talk about